My father kicked me out of the house when I was 18, pregnant and terrified. 3 years later, I came back, and what happened next left everyone speechless. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Emily Carter. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other. My parents were strict, but I always thought they loved me no matter what. At 18, just before graduation, I found out I was pregnant. My boyfriend, Ryan Miller, was the kind of guy everyone thought was charming, but when I told him the news, he turned cold. He told me it wasn't his problem, that I had ruined my own life. He walked away, leaving me alone to figure everything out. I thought the hardest part would be losing Ryan, but I was wrong. The hardest part was facing my father. David Carter was a proud man. He worked hard all his life, built a small construction business from nothing, and carried himself like he was the moral compass of the family. When I sat across from him at the kitchen table and told him I was pregnant, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't even argue. He just stared at me with this cold, disappointed look that made me want to shrink into nothing. "You've embarrassed this family," he said finally, his voice tight. "If you think you can live under my roof while carrying the child of some boy who ran off, you're wrong. Pack your things." I thought he was bluffing. I thought maybe my mom, Linda, would stop him. But she didn't. Tears streamed down her face, yet she stood frozen by the sink while my father's words slammed into me like bricks. I begged him. I told him I was scared. I told him I had nowhere to go. But his pride was stronger than his love. I'll never forget the moment I carried my small bag out of that house. My mother whispered, "I'm sorry," but she didn't step in front of me. She didn't grab my hand. She just let me go. My father didn't even look back as he shut the door behind me. The night air was cold, and my hands shook as I held my stomach. I was carrying a child inside me, yet I felt like a child myself, lost, desperate, and betrayed by the people I thought would stand by me no matter what. I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time, hoping maybe they'd change their minds, that the door would open, that my mom would wave me back inside. But it never happened. The house lights flicked off one by one, and the place that had always been my home turned into nothing more than walls that had pushed me out. I drove away with no plan, no money, and no one to call. Ryan was gone. My father had made it clear I wasn't his daughter anymore. And my mom, the one person I thought would fight for me, chose silence over standing up to him. As the miles rolled by under my tires, I kept one hand on my belly. I whispered to the baby that we'd figure it out somehow, that I'd protect us even if no one else would. But deep down, all I felt was heartbreak. My family had betrayed me, and I had no idea how I was going to survive. The first night on my own felt endless. I sat in my car, shivering under an old blanket, stomach empty and mind racing. The silence pressed down heavier than the cold, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be truly alone. With nowhere else to go, that car became my shelter. The seats were stiff, the windows fogged, and every creak outside kept me awake. Each morning, I'd brush my hair in the rearview mirror and pretend I wasn't falling apart inside. Days blurred together. I ate crackers and fast food when I could, drank water from gas stations, and told myself it was only temporary. But as my belly grew, so did the weight of reality. There were moments when I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel and whispered, "What am I going to do?" No answer came. Not from Ryan, not from my parents, just the hum of passing cars that reminded me the world was moving forward without me. One afternoon, when my gas tank was nearly empty, I pulled into a quiet neighborhood and parked under a tree. I tried to close my eyes, but a knock on the window startled me. A woman in her 60s stood there with a concerned look. She wore a simple cardigan and had kind, tired eyes. "Honey, are you living out of this car?" she asked gently. I wanted to deny it, to keep my pride, but the tears spilled before I could say a word. Her name was Mrs. Johnson. She lived alone in a modest house down the street. She invited me in for a warm meal, and I nearly broke down when I smelled fresh soup simmering on her stove. After I explained my situation, she leaned back in her chair and said, "You can stay here if you're willing to help me around the house. No rent, just honest work." My throat tightened, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe I wasn't invisible. Living under her roof was nothing fancy, but it was safe. I cleaned, cooked, and helped with her garden, grateful for every bit of stability. She never asked questions that cut too deep. She just let me exist in her home without judgment. At night, lying in a real bed, I'd rest my hand on my belly and promise the little one inside that I wasn't giving up. There were voices, though, neighbors, acquaintances, even strangers, who whispered their opinions when they learned my situation. Some said I should fix my mistake and start fresh, as if erasing my baby would erase my pain. Others suggested I should run back home and beg forgiveness. But the sting of that slammed door was still too sharp. I knew I'd rather sleep on sidewalks than crawl back to a man who'd cast me out so easily. So I kept moving forward. I picked up odd jobs, waitressing shifts, babysitting, even helping at a local diner on weekends. Every dollar I earned went towards saving for the baby. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Each long shift toughened me. Each weary night built a quiet fire inside. I began to realize that the betrayal I'd suffered was shaping me into someone stronger, someone who wouldn't bend to anyone's pride again. There were mornings when exhaustion weighed me down, when my feet ached and my back screamed, but I'd catch sight of my reflection in a shop window and hardly recognize myself. The scared girl who'd been pushed out was still there, but beneath the fear was determination. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was fighting to create a life worth living, no matter how small, no matter how hard. The night Lily came into the world was long, loud, and filled with pain I didn't know a body could hold. Every contraction ripped through me, and still, I clenched my jaw and refused to reach for the phone. No matter how badly I wanted comfort, I couldn't bring myself to call the people who had turned their backs on me. Nurses came and went, offering encouragement, but all I could think was, I am doing this on my own. When I finally heard that tiny cry, the room seemed to shift. They placed a wrinkled, warm bundle in my arms, and I knew instantly what to name her. Lily, my grandmother's favorite flower. The same woman who once cupped my face in her hands and whispered, "You're stronger than you think." Holding my daughter, I understood those words for the first time. The weeks after were brutal. Sleepless nights blurred into exhausting morning. My body ached, my clothes no longer fit, and money slipped through my hands faster than I could earn it. Still, every time Lily's small fingers curled around mine, I pushed through the fatigue. I worked double shifts at the diner, came home to rock her to sleep, and dragged myself out of bed before sunrise to study at night school. My grades weren't perfect, but they were enough to keep me moving towards something better. Mrs. Johnson's spare room became our safe corner of the. She'd hold Lily while I dashed off to class, humming softly as though the baby were her own grandchild. I never asked for pity and she never gave it, only quiet support, which was exactly what I needed. As months turned into years, I started to hear whispers around town. A cashier mentioned that Ryan had packed up and left, chasing some new opportunity in another state. No goodbyes, no attempts to check in. It was as though he had erased me and our child from his story. That stung, but not as much as what came next. At a neighborhood gathering, someone let slip what my father had been saying. According to him, I hadn't been thrown out at all. No, he told everyone I'd run away. He painted me as a reckless girl who chose shame over family, leaving him and my mother to pick up the pieces. The lie spread like wildfire, and I could see it in the way people tilted their heads at me, their smiles just a little too forced. Each time I heard his version of events, a flame lit inside me. Anger built slowly, curling hot in my chest. He hadn't just abandoned me, he'd rewritten the story to make himself look noble. The man who slammed the door in my face was walking around town as if he were the victim, while I was the coward who ran. I carried that fury with me everywhere. It simmered in the back of my mind while I scrubbed dishes at the diner, while I studied late into the night, while I rocked Lily when she woke crying. It didn't consume me, but it fueled me. If he thought I was gone for good, he was wrong. I wasn't running. I was building something brick by brick, so that one day I could return and stand taller than the man who tried to break me. The years that followed were nothing but a test of endurance. My days started before sunrise and ended long after dark. With Lily on my hip, I rushed between classrooms, shifts, and home, refusing to let exhaustion win. I studied medical terminology during lunch breaks, flipped flashcards while stirring soup, and reviewed anatomy charts by the soft light of a lamp while Lily slept beside me. Every certificate I earned pushed me closer to stability, and I clung to that progress like a lifeline. The day I received my medical assistant certification, I sat in my old, dented car with the paper in my lap and tears streaming down my cheeks. It wasn't just a document. It was proof I'd clawed my way out of the corner I'd been shoved into. It meant I could finally support Lily with more than odd jobs and tips. It meant a future I built myself, with no strings attached. The clinic that hired me became a second home. At first, I kept my head down, afraid to draw attention, but the nurses and doctors there quickly noticed how hard I worked. They saw me juggle schedules, never complain, and still smile when I talked about my little girl. One nurse, a sharp but kind woman named Carol, once told me, "Most people fold under pressure. You turned it into fuel." Those words carried me on the days I felt my legs might give out. Meanwhile, Lily blossomed into a bright 3-year-old. Her laugh filled every corner of the small apartment I eventually moved into. She danced to cartoons in mismatched socks, lined up her dolls in neat rows, and begged me to read the same bedtime story over and over. Watching her grow healthy and happy was my greatest victory. She would never know hunger the way I did, never feel unwanted the way I had. Bit by bit, my life shifted. I traded the secondhand clothes for scrubs I bought with my own paycheck. I paid rent without panic, filled the fridge without counting pennies, and tucked money into a savings jar labeled Lily's Future. It wasn't luxury, but it was security. Each step made me less recognizable to the broken girl who once sobbed in the front seat of her car. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned the price of survival and the reward of independence. People around me started to notice the change. "You've come so far," Mrs. Johnson said one evening as we shared tea. She wasn't wrong. My reflection in the mirror had shifted, shoulders squared, gaze steady, chin higher than before. I was no longer someone begging for scraps of kindness. I was standing on my own 2 feet, providing a life that was mine. Still, beneath all the growth, a quiet vow pulsed through me. Each night, after Lily drifted to sleep, I'd whisper to myself, one day, I'll walk back into his life. Not broken, not begging, but on my terms. It wasn't about revenge alone. It was about reclaiming my story, the one he tried to rewrite. He had cast me out believing I would crumble. Instead, I had built a foundation stronger than anything he could ever destroy. And when the time came, I'd make sure he saw it with his own eyes. It started with little things I overheard while running errands. A man at the grocery store mentioned that Carter Construction had lost a big contract. Later, a patient at the clinic muttered about workers not being paid on time. Each fragment of gossip fit together like puzzle pieces until the picture became clear. My father's company was crumbling. For years, he had been the kind of man people looked at with either respect or envy. His name was tied to half the buildings in town, his trucks carrying that bold logo everywhere. But success had fed his pride, and pride blinded him. He trusted the wrong people, signed deals without caution, and leaned on friends who cared more about profit than loyalty. One by one, they turned their backs, leaving him to hold the wreckage alone. The collapse hit harder than anyone expected. What had once been a steady operation shrank almost overnight. Workers quit after checks bounced. Equipment was sold off cheap. Lawsuits piled high, and with every passing week, another crack split the foundation he'd built. The same man who once preached responsibility and strength now struggled to keep his own life from unraveling. My mother didn't escape the fallout. She had always stood in the background, keeping the house neat and meals warm, pretending everything was perfect. But whispers around town reached her too. She carried the weight of humiliation in her shoulders, and stress etched itself into her face. Soon I heard she had been visiting doctors more often, her health bending under the strain. The community that once nodded approvingly when my father walked by began lowering their voices as he passed. Some pitied him, others mocked him. Pride had kept him high, but now it dragged him down, and no one rushed to soften the fall. The man who had once judged me for bringing shame now carried it himself, visible in the slump of his posture and the bitterness in his stare. Each time I heard another update, I couldn't help but recognize the twist of fate. He had thrown away his daughter to protect his reputation, yet reputation was the very thing he lost. He had slammed the door on me without hesitation, yet now doors were closing on him. What he thought would preserve his honor ended with him standing in ruin. I didn't celebrate his downfall, but I couldn't ignore the irony either. Life had a way of balancing scales, of stripping away false strength to reveal what was fragile beneath. He had been abandoned by the very success he valued more than family, left to wrestle with a hollow version of himself. Meanwhile, I had carved out a life from nothing. Each paycheck, each certificate, each bedtime story with Lily had pushed me forward. I wasn't rich, but I was steady. He, on the other hand, had lost the ground he thought unshakable. I imagined him sitting in that big house, lights dimmer than before, wondering how everything had slipped through his fingers. And though I felt no joy in his suffering, I carried a quiet certainty inside me. The man who cast me aside was learning what it meant to be powerless. 3 full years slipped by before I finally felt ready. Every struggle, every small victory had led to this moment. I woke up that morning with a steady heart and a clear mind. Lily, now tall enough to skip beside me, asked where we were going. I smoothed her hair, buttoned her little coat, and told her we had an important visit to make. I chose my clothes carefully. Nothing extravagant, just clean lines, pressed fabric, and polished shoes. I wanted to walk in with quiet confidence, not flash. My daughter held my hand tightly as we made our way down the familiar street. Each step brought back memories, but instead of fear, I felt control. This time, I wasn't coming with shame. I was coming with purpose. When I reached the porch, I paused. The paint on the door had faded, and the yard looked untended, a shadow of the home I once knew. For a moment, my breath caught. The last time I stood there, I'd been pushed out, tears stinging my face. Now I lifted my hand and knocked, firm and steady. The door creaked open, and there she was. My mother's eyes widened, her hands flying to her mouth. "Emily," she gasped, voice breaking. Tears spilled down her cheeks before I could answer. She looked smaller, thinner, as though years of worry had hollowed her out. Behind my legs, Lily peeked up at the woman she didn't recognize. Before I could step forward, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Then my father appeared. The man who once carried himself like iron now looked brittle, his hair grayer, his shoulders slumped. His eyes locked on me, then slid down to the child at my side. For the first time in my life, he seemed speechless. The silence stretched thick and heavy. My mother sobbed quietly, reaching as if she wanted to touch me, but afraid I'd pull away. My father's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked like someone who'd seen a ghost, pale and unsettled. I didn't let emotion rise. My voice stayed calm even. "We need to talk." Those words hung in the air like a line drawn in sand. I wasn't begging for shelter. I wasn't asking for forgiveness. I was standing on equal ground, not as the broken girl he cast aside, but as a woman who had built her own life. Lily's small hand squeezed mine, and I held it firmly, my gaze steady on the man who once turned his back on us. We stood in the living room, the weight of unspoken years pressing down on us. My father's arms were crossed, his jaw tight, as though bracing for a storm he couldn't name. My mother hovered close, wiping at her eyes, but I kept my focus locked on the man who had cast me aside. "I came here because there are things you need to know," I began, my voice steady. He didn't answer, but the flicker in his eyes told me he was listening, whether he wanted to or not. For a long time, I wondered how you could throw me out so easily. Then I started putting pieces together. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin folder, placing it on the worn coffee table between us. He glanced at it but didn't move. "You remember Ryan Miller?" I said evenly. His eyes narrowed, and I saw the recognition immediately. "You protected him once. Do you remember that?" My mother looked confused, but he stiffened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. I opened the folder, sliding out photocopied records I had gathered through quiet connections at the clinic, paperwork from years ago. "He was caught taking money from your company. Thousands. You covered it up, paid out of pocket to keep the police from getting involved, and you let him walk free." My father's face drained of color. My mother gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. I leaned closer, my voice cutting like a blade. "The boy you saved was the same one who left me pregnant. The one you tossed me out for. You threw away your own daughter to protect the man who destroyed your business." Silence blanketed the room. The truth sat between us, heavy and undeniable. My father's breathing grew ragged, and he finally lowered himself into the armchair as though the weight of it had stolen his strength. He shook his head slowly, eyes fixed on the documents but not really seeing them. "I didn't know," he muttered, voice hoarse. "That's the point," I snapped. "You didn't ask. You didn't want to hear me. You chose your pride, and you defended a thief while condemning your own blood." My mother's sobs broke through the quiet, but even she didn't argue. She stared at him with shock, as if seeing him for the first time. My daughter, oblivious to the storm in the room, played quietly with her doll near the couch, her little hums filling the space between our words. The betrayal finally laid bare. There was nothing left to shield him. Every lie, every decision he made came crashing down, and I could see it on his face, the realization that he hadn't just lost money or friends or reputation. He had lost his family, and it had been his own doing. For the first time, David Carter looked smaller than me. He had built his life on pride and control, but one truth had stripped him of both. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating. And in that silence, he knew exactly what he had done. The folder sat untouched on the table, but the weight of what it contained filled every corner of the room. My father's shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on the floor, as though he could hide from the truth I had laid out. My mother's sobs had quieted to shallow breaths, and even the clock on the wall seemed to tick louder than usual. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Calm words carried more force than shouting ever could. "It's simple," I said, standing tall with Lily's small hand curled around mine. "Ryan drained your company. You protected him, and it destroyed everything you built. And when it came to me, you chose to destroy your own family." He flinched, but I didn't stop. My tone stayed even deliberate. "You thought throwing me out would erase the problem, but it didn't. It just proved that pride mattered more to you than blood. You lost a daughter because you couldn't stand to face disappointment." His chest rose and fell unevenly, but he still said nothing. My mother opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came. I looked down at Lily, then back at him. "But here's the part you don't get," I continued. "We survived without you. We didn't just survive. We built a life you'll never be part of. I raised her without your help. I stood on my own 2 feet. You wanted me gone, and you got your wish." Finally, his eyes met mine, desperate and hollow. That's when I delivered the line I had carried inside me for years. "But don't you dare claim Lily. Not now, not ever. You denied us when we needed you most. You don't get to step in and act like a grandfather just because the truth caught up to you." The words struck harder than any scream. He sagged back in the chair as though the last piece of his armor had cracked. His hands shook against his knees, his mouth opening but failing to form an answer. The man who once stood unyielding, who ruled his house with authority, was now nothing but a shell, crushed under the weight of choices he couldn't take back. His pride had not only cost him a business, but the right to call himself a father. And there was no undoing it. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was final. He knew, and I knew, that nothing could be rebuilt between us. My mother's trembling voice broke the stillness. "Emily, please, he's your father." Her eyes were swollen, her hands clasped together as if prayer might pull me back. "Can't we put this behind us?" For Lily's sake. Her words struck deep, but I held firm. I had carried too many scars to let them be brushed away by pleas. "No," I answered, calm but sharp. "I won't let her grow up thinking this is love. I won't let her believe pride matters more than compassion. She deserves better than that." My father's head dropped lower. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, a man hollowed out by his own mistakes. I stepped closer, not to comfort him, but to make sure he heard me clearly. "You'll live with this," I said, steady and direct. "Every time you see her face, every time you hear her name, you'll remember that you turned your back on us. And you'll know she'll never call you grandpa. That title belongs to someone who chooses family, not someone who destroys it." My mother sobbed harder, reaching for me, but I pulled Lily close and shook my head. "I won't risk her heart just to patch up your guilt." The room seemed to close in with the sound of his breathing breaking into uneven gasps. He finally covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. The man who once pushed me out without hesitation was crumbling before me, undone by the reality that no apology could fix. I turned toward the door, Lily's tiny fingers wrapping around mine. She looked up at me with innocent eyes, unaware of the storm we were walking away from. My steps were steady, each one echoing louder in that quiet house. As the door clicked shut behind us, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The image of him, slumped and sobbing, was etched into my mind, the proud man broken at last, left alone with nothing but the weight of his own choices. The car engine hummed softly as we pulled away from the street I once called home. Years ago, I had left that place with nothing but tears and fear. Now, I was leaving with steady hands on the wheel and my daughter in the back seat, humming to herself. The road stretched out ahead, and for the first time, I didn't feel trapped by it. I felt free. Every mile between me and that house felt like a chapter closing. The girl who had been cast out had vanished long ago. In her place was a woman who had built her own ground to stand on, one who no longer carried shame but strength. I glanced at Lily through the mirror, her small face glowing under the dim light of her tablet, and my chest filled with quiet certainty. We had walked through fire, and we had come out whole. By the time we reached our apartment, the night was deep. Lily's eyes were heavy, her head nodding as I carried her upstairs. The weight of her in my arms felt different now. Not a burden, never that, but a living reminder of how far we had come together. I laid her gently in bed, smoothing her hair back as her breathing slowed. Leaning close, I whispered, "We're free." The words slipped out soft but sure, carrying every ounce of truth I had gathered over the last 3 years. Free from his judgment, free from his pride, free from the chains of a story he tried to write for me. I stood there for a long moment, watching Lily sleep, before turning off the lamp. The apartment was quiet, but not the heavy, lonely kind of quiet I had once known. This was peace. This was ours. Lying down in my own bed, I let the thought settle. What nearly broke me had, in the end, built me. My father had thought his punishment would crush me, but it had only carved out the strength I didn't know I had. And when I walked back into his life, it wasn't as a lost child begging for forgiveness. It was as a woman who showed him the cost of his choices. He never expected the ending I delivered. He never imagined that the daughter he discarded would return not with tears, but with truth sharp enough to cut him to the core. And that was the real revenge. Not anger, not shouting, but the quiet power of living better without him. The past no longer haunted me. It had become the fuel that carried me forward. And as I closed my eyes, I knew one thing for certain. His betrayal had given me strength he could never take away. Do you think I made the right choice walking away for good, or should I have given them one more chance? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like mine.